The morning air was chilly, a sharp wind cutting through the layers of my coat. As I walked along the back trail by my cottage, I first heard it, a low, hissing sound coming from the old barn near the sheep field. In the dim light, hidden beneath crumbling boards and hay, I spotted a small black and white cat. She was curled protectively around 3 tiny kittens. Her gaze was intense, a mix of fear and defiance, challenging me to approach. I paused, my heart racing, knowing this would be a complicated situation. The following morning, I returned with a plan and a basket of sardines. The old barn creaked, as if it held centuries of secrets. I moved slowly, careful to avoid stepping on any loose boards that could startle her. Marla was still there, exactly as before, tucked around her kittens, eyes locking onto mine with unwavering intensity. As I stepped inside, she let out a long, low hiss, her tail flicking in agitation. The kittens were barely the size of my palm, 3 fragile little furballs, blind and quiet. One had a gunky eye, another struggled to nurse. The third, a gray kitten I would later name Moss, lay still, not lifeless but clearly weak. I realized I couldn't simply walk away. I placed the sardines a few feet from her and settled onto an overturned feed bucket. I didn't reach out or speak. I just waited. Time seemed to stretch on. A friend had once cautioned me about feral mothers, how their fierce behavior comes from fear rather than hatred. She'd told me, if she feels trapped, she'll fight, but if she feels acknowledged, she might let you stay. So I waited. By nightfall, the food remained untouched, but at least she hadn't attacked. That felt like progress amidst the howling wind. Inside the barn, it was just the 2 of us, each uncertain about the other. Days passed in a blend of quiet determination. I made my way to the barn every morning and evening, bringing fresh food for Marla while keeping a respectful distance. Her reactions hadn't shifted much. She hissed when I got too close, her back arched and fur fluffed. Nevertheless, she didn't lash out, and I took this as a sign of progress. I focused on the kittens, trying to feed them when their mother was distracted. Moss, the gray one, seemed to weaken more with each passing day. He always kept to himself, as if he sensed he was different from his siblings. I began to worry for his survival. One afternoon, I was sitting on a haystack, trying not to invade anyone's space too much, when Theo showed up. He was young and a bit too quick to act, often jumping into situations without fully understanding them. Though he meant well, sometimes that eagerness could lead to trouble. He went in close to Marla, not really noticing how tense she was. "She's just scared," he said as he crouched down near her. "We can't leave them here. We should take them to the shelter." I shook my head. "No, she's their mother. If we take them away now, we could lose them all." I could see the frustration and confusion on Theo's face. He was struggling to grasp the situation while I felt a clear understanding. Marla just needed some space. It was important for her to feel in control of her choices. On the 6th morning, everything changed. The barn, which was typically filled with Marla's low growls and the soft sounds of kittens nestled close to her, was disturbingly quiet. The cold air had seeped deep into the wooden beams overnight, and the early sunlight streamed through the cracks, casting shadows like searching hands. As I walked through the warped doorway, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach. There was no sign of Marla, no flash of fur in the shadows, no hiss to assert her presence, just an unsettling silence that hung in the air. I moved quickly yet carefully, looking in the usual spots where she would be. The kittens, Ash and Bramble, were nearby, tangled in a piece of burlap by the feeding dish, crying out in confusion. They seemed hungry but okay. However, something was wrong. There were only 2 of them. Moss, the smallest and most delicate, was missing. My heart raced, and I lowered myself to the floor, scraping my hands against the straw and debris as I searched desperately under loose boards and fallen beams, the cold biting right through my jacket. Fear clouded my mind. Had Marla pushed him away? Had she hidden him? Or had something else gotten in during the night? Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a small gray shape curled up next to a metal water trough, partially buried in the frozen ground. I rushed over, slipping on the damp earth, and fell to my knees beside him. Moss was there, hardly hanging on. His fur was wet and his breathing was shallow, his tiny body cold against my palms as I lifted him carefully and wrapped him inside my coat. I held him for a moment, feeling the faint rhythm of his heartbeat against my chest, wondering if I had come just in time. Then I noticed something, a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. Slowly, I turned towards the tree line behind the barn, and there she was, Marla. She was low to the ground, crouched at the edge where the thick bramble met the open field. This time, she wasn't growling or running, she was simply observing. Her gaze was sharp but calm. Her ears flicked once, and her tail was curled around her paws, as if she was guarding something delicate and unsure whether to pull it back or allow it to be cared for. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Marla hadn't abandoned Moss. She had moved him from the damp barn into the sunlight, searching for any dry spot to help warm him up. Her instincts were not failing her. She was doing all she could with limited resources. She hadn't given up, and now I found myself caught between her instinct and my own choices. Did helping mean stepping in or taking a step back? Inside the cottage, I placed Moss in a shallow box lined with soft wool and added a hot water bottle beneath layers of towels. His breaths were still shallow but steady. I worked quickly, trying to stay calm while recalling Edith's lesson from the day she had taught me how to warm up hypothermic kittens. As I gently dabbed the corners of his little mouth with a syringe of kitten milk, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Theo had come back. He rushed in, full of energy that felt out of place, mud still on his boots and his hoodie slipping off one shoulder. "Did you find them? Did she let you take them?" he asked, his eyes widening when he saw Moss wrapped in flannel on the table. "She didn't let me," I replied softly, not meeting his gaze. "She was watching." He tilted his head. "Watching?" "She moved him outside. I think she was trying to save him," I continued, almost more to myself than to him. "She didn't abandon him. She was hoping something else would help." Theo was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to something more subdued. Maybe respect, maybe guilt. "So, what do we do now?" I shook my head slowly. "We wait, and we include her in this. This isn't just about rescuing him, it's a negotiation." Outside, I caught sight of her again. Marla, sitting patiently beneath the same hedge. She hadn't run away. This time, she didn't seem to want to chase me off. The next morning, the sound of heavy boots crunching on frost drew my attention, accompanied by soft voices outside my front window. When I stepped out, I found Edith at the gate, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her thick wool cardigan. She was talking quietly with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, the kind of person whose presence seems to fill the space around him. His pickup truck, dented and rusted, was idling at the edge of the lane, casting long shadows across the grass. Later, Edith explained that he was from the council. Complaints had been made. Someone had seen me coming in and out of the barn, their barn. The owners were considering having it torn down, likely within the week. They cited issues like liability, decay, and unwanted attention, the usual concerns. Notably, the man didn't even ask about the cats. As Edith's words settled in, I felt a chill deep in my bones. The barn was more than just a shelter for Marla and her kittens. It was the only place left that hadn't turned them away. And now, even that security was at risk. Inside, I noticed Moss stirring weakly in his box. He was gaining strength, able to lift his head, though he still cried softly when the air got too cold. Outside, I caught another glimpse of Marla, this time closer, watching the truck with slightly backward ears and a twitching tail that showed her unease. In that stillness, it struck me. Our rescue effort had changed. We were no longer just trying to earn her trust. We were now racing against time. That night, after Theo had left and Edith promised to explore any options she could, I found myself alone in the kitchen. The kettle was steaming, and the house was enveloped in quiet. Moss was curled up beneath a desk lamp's warm glow, sleeping more soundly than he had in days. Ash and Bramble remained in the barn under Marla's care. I hadn't moved them yet. I couldn't bring myself to separate them, especially when she had finally begun to see me as something other than a threat. But a persistent question echoed in my mind, one I hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. What will happen if the barn is gone tomorrow? What if I'm not there when it happens? Will they survive? Leaning forward, I rested my elbows on the table and stared at the worn wood grain until it blurred before my eyes. I didn't want to push them into a situation they didn't choose. I didn't want to take away Marla's last piece of herself, her role, her dignity, her small slice of control. Yet at the same time, I couldn't bear the thought of losing them completely. Sometimes I reflected, rescue isn't just about improving circumstances. It can also mean deciding what kind of loss you can endure. As the storm rolled in, the land already seemed restless. The wind swept branches across rooftops and tore leaves from hedges, like old secrets being pulled away. That afternoon, I headed to the barn, carrying the weight of Edith's words. She had spoken to the landowners, but they were unmoved. Indeed, a bright orange notice nailed to the barn's front post announced an upcoming demolition in just 2 days. Inside, the air felt colder than usual, and the smell of mildew was sharp. I called out softly to Marla, just to let her know I was there. But the silence was telling. There was no growl, no rustling, just stillness. As I ventured further in, my heart raced. I carefully navigated around old feed barrels and broken timber. The corner where Marla usually nested was bare. The burlap nest lay scattered, the straw still warm, but there was no sign of her or her kittens. I searched every corner of the barn, even climbing into the rafters and peering behind the splintered stalls, my heart pounding with each empty spot I found. Outside, the wind rattled the boards, and rain began to tap lightly on the roof. But there was still no Marla ash or bramble. It felt as if she had blended into the landscape, taking her young with her. No goodbyes, no warnings, just silence. I stood there shrouded in darkness and disbelief, grappling with a troubling thought. Would she return? That night was restless. Moss whimpered in his sleep, urgent and restless, as if reaching for something he couldn't grasp. I fed him slowly, whispering words I wasn't sure he understood. Maybe I was saying them more for myself than for him. You're safe now. I've got you. They'll be back. They'll be back. But when morning came, the barn still felt empty. Theo arrived just before noon, drenched from the rain, clutching 2 mismatched gloves and that familiar hope of his. It was a hope that both lifted me and drained my energy all at once. We searched through the hedgerows and fields together, calling out gently, crouching beside brambles and peering into drainage pipes. Each flicker of movement caught our attention as if it might lead us to her. A rustle turned out to be a pheasant, and a quick glimpse of white was just a plastic bag snagged on thorns. Then, near the old stone wall that marked the boundary of my field, Theo suddenly stopped and pointed. There, he whispered, his voice soft as if afraid to disturb the moment. Under the gnarled roots of an elder tree, nestled in a shallow patch of leaf litter, lay ash and bramble, tightly pressed together, wide-eyed and damp, but alive. Just beyond them, hidden in the underbrush, Marla stood watch, her body low to the ground, her eyes fixed on us. But she didn't hiss, she didn't run away, she simply watched. We paused in silence, our hearts pounding, boots sinking into the mud, before I crouched down and extended my hand, palm open. I wasn't asking for anything, I was just offering. Marla stayed still, neither moving nor turning away. In that quiet space between fear and trust, something changed. It wasn't quite peace, but it was enough to inspire hope. The next morning brought a pale sun and the distant rumble of machinery down the road. I knew what that meant. The council had no plans to back down. The demolition crew would arrive by midday. The barn, our silent refuge, was set to be torn down. Time was running out, measured in just a few hours. I wrapped Moss in his blanket, cradled him against my chest, and headed back to the elder tree, where Marla had curled up with the others like a protective barrier of fur and bone. She blinked slowly as I approached. No greeting, no alarm, just an acknowledgement. She seemed to know I was there, perhaps even waiting for my arrival. I sat a short distance away, speaking softly about things she couldn't fully grasp, but that she needed to hear. I explained that the barn was going. I told her I couldn't leave them here with the noise, the chaos, and the looming threat of trucks rumbling through. I offered to take them somewhere safe, a warm, quiet place where they wouldn't be chased away. Yet, even as I spoke, a part of me hesitated. Who was I to make such choices? To take her from the only home she had ever known, to separate her from the trees and shadows that surrounded her. Theo arrived with a carrier and soft towels, his expression uncertain. Edith stood by the gate, arms crossed tightly over her chest. It was time to act. I sat there, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of my choice. To rescue meant to protect, but it also brought power, a responsibility I didn't want to bear. In that moment, all I wanted was for her to choose me as well. The sound of the demolition truck's engine reverberated in the distance, steady like a countdown, urging me to make a decision. Theo knelt next to me, holding the carrier open. His expression was tight with concern. "If we don't act now," he said, his voice low but urgent, "they'll be gone when the backhoe arrives. You understand that?" I nodded, but didn't move. Marla remained curled up next to her kittens, her body tense, yet still. I could see the awareness in her eyes. She recognized that an ending was near. Her ears twitched with every sound, yet she didn't flinch or run. Instead, she kept her gaze on me. I had visualized this moment differently, expecting her to bolt. I thought I would have to catch her before she slipped away. But she wasn't fleeing, she was waiting. It felt like she was testing me. Reaching into my coat pocket, I pulled out the same soft cloth I had used to dry Moss the night I found him near the trough. Carefully, without saying a word, I placed it near her paws. The kittens stirred, and Bramble let out a soft mew, nose twitching. Marla looked at the cloth, then back at me. Then, in a movement so gentle and slow that I almost imagined it, she nudged Bramble forward with her nose. Next came Ash, and she paused for a final glance at the barn in the distance, the only home she had ever known. At last, she picked up Bramble by the scruff and made her way to me, dropping him gently into the cloth-lined carrier. Theo let out a breath he had been holding. I remained still, fearing any movement would shatter the moment. Marla looked at me once more and, without a sound or command, crawled in beside her kittens. In that instant, she didn't just choose rescue, she chose trust. It felt monumental. The carrier stood between us, a delicate pact, quivering slightly with the movement of 3 tiny bodies inside. Marla huddled protectively over them, breaths shallow, her eyes darting towards the open barn, as if grieving for something unseen. The machines were now closer, their metallic growls rising as engines idled by the road. I could hear the clamor of men unloading tools, the slamming of truck doors, and the indistinct murmur of voices that didn't know, or seemed to disregard, what lives had once thrived in this forgotten corner of the world. I carefully stood up, brushing the soil from my knees. Theo looked up at me, waiting patiently, his hand resting on the carrier handle as if he were hesitant to move it without a nod from me. Edith, who had been observing the situation quietly, stepped forward. Her voice was gentle yet firm. "They won't wait long," she said. "If we're going to do this, it has to be now." But I found myself unable to move. A part of me, stubborn and weary, seemed to stay rooted by that elder tree, near that barn, reflecting on every decision that had led us here. Taking Marla meant pulling her from her wild, free life. It meant asking her to adjust, to live within the safe confines of routine. It was a trade-off, her freedom for protection. As I gazed into her calm eyes through the carrier's mesh, I was unsure whether she was forgiving me or simply enduring the situation. Yet, she didn't fight me. She remained still, watching over her kittens with a steady resolve. The sky above us turned pale and still, almost as if it were holding its breath. Together, we lifted the carrier and began to leave the barn behind. Upon arriving at the shelter, a heavy silence greeted us, too quiet for my liking. The afternoon light streamed through the blinds in soft stripes that fell across the tiled floor, creating an atmosphere of faded memories. The air carried the scent of disinfectant and dry kibble, and the comforting hum of heat lamps in the recovery room was the only sound to break the stillness. I walked in through the back entrance with the carrier, Theo trailing closely behind, his hands buried deep in his pockets and his shoulders tense with uncertainty. Marla had not made a sound during our journey. She lay curled protectively over her kittens, her eyes half closed but always alert. As I set the carrier on the counter, she lifted her head, not in panic nor in anger, just observing, her presence calm. The staff moved around us with quiet efficiency, offering space while exchanging glances filled with professional concern, though they refrained from asking questions I couldn't voice. Edith arrived moments later, bringing with her an old, soft fleece blanket and a look that suggested she had witnessed many such stories before, and that they never really got easier. I opened the carrier slowly, half expecting Marla to bolt or revert to her wild instincts under the unfamiliar lights and scents. Instead, she stayed put, simply raising her nose toward the warmth of the lamp above, Her kittens began to stir beneath her, their tiny limbs stretching toward the newfound heat. Then I noticed it. Her eyes, which had once been so sharp, now appeared tired, cautious, resigned. It might even be a feeling of gratitude. This wasn't the ending people usually picture. There was no joyful rush into my arms, no soft purring, no grand victory. Yet she allowed me to touch her. Not as a hero or a savior, but simply as someone who had been there, long enough and quietly enough to be trusted. Time has passed since that moment. Moss now sleeps curled on a cozy blanket near the radiator in my little cottage. His tiny body is stronger, and his breathing is steady. Occasionally he cries out in his sleep, and I can't help but wonder what he's dreaming of. Does he remember the trough, the cold earth, or perhaps the sound of his mother's heart? Meanwhile, Ash and Bramble are with Marla at the shelter, where they get a quiet spot away from barking dogs and the bustle of the world. The staff keeps their distance. Marla only allows a few to get close. Marla hasn't completely let her guard down. She still looks at everyone with that sharp, cautious gaze. However, she stays. In her decision to remain, there's a sense of permission, one that doesn't need to show affection to convey acceptance. I still visit her. Sometimes I sit by the door of her room in silence. Other times I bring her the same sardines from our first day together. Most of the time she doesn't approach me, but she doesn't retreat either. And perhaps that's enough. Rescue doesn't always come with happy endings. Sometimes it's about giving something wild the chance to feel safe. It's about being present for a creature that might never come closer, but knows that you're there. And maybe, if we're fortunate, that's what stays with them and with us. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever found yourself in that quiet space between fear and trust, between helping and letting go, share it. Let others understand what it means to care without conditions. Because often the most impactful part of rescue isn't the transformation. It's the patience, the presence, and the choice to stay, even when the outcome is uncertain. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please think about subscribing, leaving a comment, or passing it along to someone who appreciates the quiet beauty of earning trust. One breath, one heartbeat at a time.